Welcome to the first session of our Year 12 project presentations for 2021. I'm Eleanor Waterford, one of the acting assistant principals at the Mount Barker Waldorf School. It's a great joy to introduce you to our presentations tonight. I've had the pleasure of working with this great collection of students, and I know they're excited to share their projects with you. To those of you here in the room with us tonight, welcome. It's lovely to have you here with us. To those of you joining us through the live stream, we welcome you too. It's an unexpected silver lining of these recent times, finding ways to connect wherever you are and to share our students' work. Even if you're far away, we've included a link with tonight's YouTube page. It's a link to Slido where you can post questions for our students. And Elise and Liam are going to be monitoring that so they can share the questions with our students after their presentations. And so you can also be a part of their Q&A afterwards. Please don't be shy. Send them in good time so we can include them. Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge the parents of the Class 12s here tonight. Perhaps you're feeling nervous butterflies of excitement. That's to be expected at such a moment. But we're wishing you well as well. We're not looking for perfection here tonight, but we want to share your stories. Also, I'd like to welcome the teachers who've come to be with us, and the alumni too. It's great to have so many of you with us. Right, that's enough from me. Before we dive into the Class 12's journeys, I'd like to welcome Liam Waterford to the stage. But before I do that, the Class 12s are going to do our acknowledgement to country. If you know it, please do it with us. We would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of our region, the Barraman people, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since time immemorial. We honor the presence of the ancestors of this land. We give reverential spirituality to the whole creation. We acknowledge the gratitude that we share this land today, and historically acknowledge the historical as well as intergenerational costs of that sharing. We would also like to acknowledge our hope and belief that we can move to a place of equity, justice, and partnership together for the future. You can rest easy, Class 12, because I think I did the first slip up, so you guys are all going to be fine now. Okay, I'd like to welcome Liam Waterford, our acting principal, down to the stage to give us an intro. Thank you.
Dear students, parents, teachers, family members, distinguished guests, and viewers from around the globe, I would like to start today by acknowledging our connection to the paramount land we are on this afternoon. This land has and always will be Aboriginal land. For thousands of years, the wisdom of an entire people has flowed over this land, passed on in traditional methods, watched over by generations of elders. I pay my respects to those elders and to the elders today who are keeping this connection to land, water, sky and culture strong. And to the young adults who will one day emerge as the elders of their country. I would also like to acknowledge other Torres Strait Islander and Aboriginal people with us today, and thank you for your continued connection to country and culture. We are gathered here this afternoon to listen and to learn. And not to me or my wisdom, although I'm sure there are a few things that are going slightly grey, school leader born last century can bring that would be relevant. We're here to listen to the wisdom of these students in front of us today. All of them newly minted this century. So over the next 4 days, we're going to hear each of these students' stories about their journey with their project over this year. We'll hear about the things that worked well, the challenges, the triumphs, and how their journey unfolded throughout the year. And that's only if we listen with our heads. Over the next 4 days, I'd like to invite you to also listen with your hearts. Really feel into how each of these young adults have taken a step into their own being, their individuality. Their stories will give you a small glimpse into the ineffable and invisible path that exists in potential for each of us, our guiding light, our destiny. One of the joys of this weekend is to see the potential becoming of these young adults, to glimpse that first step into the world of individuality, of understanding the power we all have as adults, the power of freedom. Rudolf Steiner had some strong views on freedom and the part that education has to play in it, which can be heard in the following quote. To be free is to be capable of thinking one's own thoughts, not the thoughts merely of the body or of society, but thoughts generated by one's deepest, most original, most essential and spiritual self, one's individuality. To be capable of thinking one's own thoughts. So for the last 12 years and longer for some of you, we have allowed these young people to gradually go from being told what to do to being taught how to think and be an individual surrounded and embedded in community. This project weekend is a culmination of that journey and also a beginning of the next steps. Steiner also talks about one's deepest, most original, most essential and spiritual self. So as a school, we believe that every one of our students has the right to find this inner self, to begin on the lifelong journey of understanding the world through understanding oneself. And this weekend marks a significant milestone on that journey, one that we are all here to witness as their community. And so we circle back to my exhortation to listen with your hearts, for it's only on this level that we can truly see the depth of the being that stands in front of us. Finally, to the Class 12s. It is traditional at these times to give you some words of wisdom that you'll carry with you in your hearts for years to come. Well, that's what my privileged white male principal hat is telling me to do, but I also recognise that anyone born last century, giving you wisdom is about as useless as a lightsaber without a kyber crystal, or a port player winning the Brownlow. Now, having said that, I would like to give you one small thing about values. We have school values, and if you think hard enough, you can probably figure out what your family values are. Our society has values, and we all have connections to institutions that have values. One of the great things about being an adult is you get to work out for yourself what your values are. Now, I know that this year has opened your eyes to different ways of thinking and being through the main lesson journey you've been on, and that you've probably started wondering what kind of person you are or could be. So I want to give you an insight into some of my own personal values that I try to live by, in the hope that they can inspire you to think about your own. Now, as a leader, you're judged every day by your actions and your words. And if you can stay true to a strong set of values in all that you do, then you can inspire those around you. So 3 values that I personally hold highly in my work and my life, particularly here at the school: hope, optimism, and humour. Have I always been hopeful, optimistic, and humorous? Well, I'd like to think so, but in reality, it's only been through my work as a leader that I have consciously worked with these values. And I believe that much of my success has been in recognising and striving for these values in my life and work. Now, our job this weekend is to recognise... Our job this weekend is to listen with our hearts and hear the true you. Your job. Your job this weekend is to recognise this in yourself, to recognise your own wisdom, be conscious of what lives within you as potential and allow it to grow and shine. So then one day, when you come back, we'll recognise the powerful human being that we only glimpsed this weekend. Thank you. Go well.
Thank you, Liam, and good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming to watch our speeches. First up is the wonderful and talented Tess Houtman. This year, Tess has been exploring aviation. Please help me give her a warm welcome.
Please raise your hand if you know who Oprah Winfrey is. Okay, great. This is going to make this next part a lot easier. If you know who Oprah is, then you probably know that on the Oprah Winfrey Show, Oprah likes to give away gifts. Sometimes she gives away something exceptional, fabulous, breathtaking. So, in true Oprah fashion, please look under your chairs. Under some of your chairs, taped to the bottom, is an envelope. Do not open it. Hold it tight. Keep it closed. Sometimes, Oprah likes to give away a fancy car, a brand new house, or a sparkling 5-star cruise over the Atlantic Ocean. I am going to give away something much, much better than that. I am going to reintroduce every one of you to a Rudolf Steiner quote. Throughout my Year 12 project, I found that everything I did and everywhere I went led me back to this one central quote. You see that envelope in your hands? I want you to hold it closed, and while I explain a bit about what I did for my Year 12 project, I want to see who of you Waldorfians can guess which Steiner quote I am referring to. Are you ready? Okay. To understand my project, we need to start at the beginning. As you are all aware, we are currently living in a pandemic. A pandemic that has had a toll on the way we work, live, and connect. A pandemic that has also had a toll on pilots across the world, with 57% of pilots losing their jobs. Although this statistic is horrible, what is worse, it is only the beginning of the supply and demand problems in aviation. Behind me is a graph that shows the predicted demand and supply of pilots across time. You can see that hovering over the 2020 and the 2021 year, there is a sharp dip in demand as a result of the pandemic. On the other side of the timeline, in 8 years' time, there is a growing space between demand and supply once again. Except this time, instead of there not being planes for pilots to fly, there are too many. More and more goods and people will fly in the future. In 20 years' time, we are going to need over 800,000 pilots to support this demand. To put this in perspective, this is more than if we cloned Class 12 40,000 times. So, for my Year 12 project, I wanted to investigate what role I could play in preventing the upcoming shortage of pilots. Please raise your hand if you are a pilot in the audience. Not very many, hey? One of the most common reasons we don't have more pilots among us is because of the sheer cost of flight training. To gain your commercial license, it can cost from $65,000 upwards, and that's not even including other mandatory training. When I first found this staggering cost, I felt overwhelmed. I wanted to become a pilot to understand the problem better. Of course, I do admit that I also wanted to become a pilot because of an experience I had in Year 9. In Year 9, I had the opportunity to fly in a helicopter over the Grand Canyon, which I thought was the best thing since sliced bread. After seeing the Colorado River wind through the deep red valleys, I went back to the hotel and called my mum, who was in Australia at the time. Before she had a chance to talk, I said, "Mum, I am going to be a pilot." And she said, "That's great, honey." However, 3 years later, without $65,000, it seemed like my dream was impossible. That was until a family friend introduced me to Adelaide Soaring Club. Adelaide Soaring Club is a club based in Gawler who offer recreational flight training. A recreational pilot's license allows pilots to fly for fun, and it's far cheaper than commercial training. Adelaide Soaring Club is also one of the only volunteer-based clubs in Australia, which makes it even more affordable because students don't have to pay for the tuition, but only the instruction and the fuel and the upkeep of aircraft. This all meant that in August last year, I was able to begin flight training. The first thing you should know about my flight training is that my family has no background in aviation. I had no grandmas who flew in the war and no uncles who went to flight school. My only exposure to aviation was through commercial flights, where I'd often focused on the cute prepackaged food and the movie selection. This meant that when I came to my first lesson in a Jabiru 170, I was completely unprepared. I remember standing on the tarmac next to the plane when the instructor told me to jump inside. I was so excited. I was about to learn how to fly. But my excitement quickly melted as I looked at the door of the plane. The door was not like a house door or a car door, or unlike any door I'd ever seen before. How do I open it? I thought. So, like any good problem solver, I pushed on the metal, hoping that it would pop open like one of those IKEA doors. But the door didn't open. There was this funny metal bit on the door, but I didn't know if it was supposed to be there. I didn't even know if it was the door. It was then that the scope of my ignorance dawned on me. I knew nothing. Technically speaking, I had no idea what planes were, and I certainly didn't know how they flew. I started to feel embarrassed. Here I was trying to be a pilot, and I couldn't even open the door. Since that day, I've completed over 37 flights with an instructor, plus an additional 9 solo flights. I've passed 5 exams on aerodynamics, legislation, radio procedures, and more. I can show you where the hydraulic braking fluid overflow bottle is, or where the pedo tube sits, but most of all, I can show you how to open the door. From not knowing what a single dial meant to flying at 3,000 feet by myself, learning to fly has been one of the biggest learning curves I have ever experienced. Of course, between the start and now, there has been many ups and downs. One of my biggest challenges throughout my flight training was being grounded for some time. This was during the month of June, when my instructor took an unexpected break from instructing. I remember sitting in my room. I was feeling really worried that I was going to lose all those skills I'd worked so hard to gain. And it was at this point that I remembered my instructor saying, it's good to visualize yourself flying when you can't actually be in the plane. At the time, I thought he was crazy. But in my state of desperation, I decided to give it a go. And what I learned is that it feels just as silly as it looks, especially if you go the extra mile and add in a broomstick to be your pretend control column. But it was useful. So I want to show you what it's like. I would close my eyes and pretend to fly. You are in a small 2-seater plane. Although the smell of fuel and oil still lingers from the aircraft safety checks, the doors are locked and you're ready to go.
Hi, Carl, I hope you're watching. Let's just only taxi.
You release the brakes and taxi.
Talk it out. Right. Brake is off.
Traffic Gawler, vehicle on ground crossing 23 Gawler.
Fuel on. We're going to put half flaps for takeoff.
You adjust the plane settings, ready for takeoff. You're excited by the gliders swirling about in the air.
Traffic caller W7385. Lining up for immediate takeoff 23 caller.
You take a deep breath as you line yourself up on the bitumen. Your body feels alive and you're unsure whether it's from nerves or excitement. You check the windsock. Then you push the throttle in for full power. Your body jolts slightly forward, surprised by the power. And you wait. You wait and you wait until you feel the ground become unstable. Then the ground drops down from beneath you as your wheels lift up. Your belly feels funny and an emotion stirs inside of you. For some, it is excitement. For people like my mum, it's horror. And for me, it's awe.
Nose up. Trim back. Yay! No, don't get excited.
During my break from flight training, when I was on the ground, I took time to create moments like these, to not only remember technical routines, like how to check the carburetor and the stall warming, but to stay connected to the feelings I always gain from flight. Remembering the awe I always feel from flight kept me inspired to continue when I could have stopped. Upon return, I found that I adapted reasonably to a real plane, reasonably well, even though I did struggle to mumble out certain radio calls. To be honest, radio calls are something I've struggled with throughout the entirety of my project. The first time my instructor asked me to say a radio call, I turned on the radio and just swore badly over the regional intercom. However, like practice during my break helped me to overcome my time away from flying. Saying my radio calls over and over and over again helped me to counteract the stage fright I felt. About halfway through my project, I reflected on the pilot shortage crisis I intended to solve. I thought, how could people not want to fly when they can do so here in a positive environment at a lower cost? Curious, I asked one of my flight instructors, Phil, expecting him to say that we don't have more people flying among us because we don't market ourselves very well. Instead, what he said surprised me. He said, actually, we do have many people who want to learn how to fly. The problem isn't getting enough people to fly. It's about having the capacity of volunteers to teach them all. That's when it hit me. People do want to be pilots. There isn't a lack of people interested in aviation. There's a lack of pathways to it. I thought about it. There are 6 flight instructors at my club, and hundreds dying to learn. I wanted those hundreds to learn, and I knew that for many, especially the youth, this club had acted as a pathway to flying professionally. I came up with the following hypothesis. If I could help carry the burden of running the club by volunteering, my instructors would have more time to teach, and more people would be able to fly. Of course, I am not qualified to teach others to fly, so I saw other ways I could contribute. I volunteered at air shows, held plane washing days, chipped in at working bees, and began to digitise my club's historical documents. The most challenging of these activities was by far the plane wash. I don't know if any of you have tried to scrub the gunk off a transier pot. Actually, I do know that the year 11s and 12s have. But cleaning the belly of a plane requires the exact same amount of elbow grease and frustration. In addition to this community work, I also wanted to make the volunteers at my club feel appreciated because they contribute in such a profound way. However, I didn't know how I could effectively appreciate them. So I asked one of my teachers, Grace, her opinion. And this is what she said to me. My advice is to go back inside of yourself and remember a time when you truly felt appreciated. Did your heart feel like it was going to beat out of your chest? Did your shoulders suddenly relax? Did the burden you were carrying at the time suddenly feel lighter? Then try to recreate that for somebody else. After hearing Grace's advice, I tried to think of a particular moment where I felt overwhelmed by a friend's action. Although there were My mind kept going back to a time I was appreciated in year 2. There was a Draw Your Hero competition at school, and all my friends and I were entering. I went home, laid out my coloured pencils, and began crafting a portrait of an Olympian, inspired by his perseverance and dedication. When the day came that the drawings were due, I was so excited. I thought I was going to win. But it was at this point that I realised that my best friend had chosen me as her hero and was submitting a picture she drew of me. In that moment, I felt incredibly thankful and proud. 10 years later, I have tried to recreate that feeling I gained from being drawn from my instructors. I began to interview the instructors, learning about their stories and creating art from their work to gift back to them. After creating the first few portraits, I began to feel overwhelmingly grateful to have the opportunity to hear and display their stories. Each one of them are not only extremely skilled pilots, but altruistic individuals. You see, Colin wouldn't tell you, but he doesn't only volunteer at my club, but he also volunteers for the Salvation Army, for Operation Flinders, and is a senior instructor at the Lifeline Call Centre. And Sue is the second chief flying instructor in Australia. After creating the first few portraits, I felt so excited that I created more, adding portraits of pilots like Kirsty, who has been training captains at airlines and creating procedure manuals that are gender inclusive. There were stories about what it's like to fly high, solo in a jet at 40,000 feet, and what it's like to fly low over the savannah. But no matter how much I tried to give to my community, I always came away from the interview feeling like I'd gained, somehow enriched by their stories. When I see these pictures, I don't think of them as my drawings, but rather embodiments of my biggest role models. Looking back at my whole project, I am doubtful that I made any change to the pilot shortage crisis that looms in the future. It feels as though it were a jumbo jet that I failed to lift by myself. I don't mean to imply my efforts were a waste. I don't think that at all. A contribution is still a contribution, no matter how small. Besides, through my project, I found that I learned a lot about myself and gained a self-awareness that I can take with me into the future. Okay, let's pause there. From what I have told you, I wonder if anyone can guess the Rudolph Steiner quote that I've been referring to. Okay, please open your envelopes. For those who have an envelope, inside reads the Rudolph Steiner quote. To truly know the world, look deeply within your own being. To truly know yourself, take real interest in the world. I want you to focus particularly on the last half of the quote. To truly know yourself, take real interest in the world. I started my project by wanting to solve this big, looming problem in the aviation industry. But by engaging with my flying community, I found that I learnt more about myself than anything else. For example, when I experienced a break from flying, I learnt that I am more resilient and more adaptive to change than I may have realised. In particular, there are 3 ways that my project highlighted my inadequacies and taught me to be better. 1. Learning to fly has taught me that I have the potential to think quicker than I could before. In a real-world scenario, if your plane has an engine failure, you have 1 or 2 seconds to wet your pants with shock before you must figure out how to fly your plane to safety and deliver the infamous Mayday, Mayday, Mayday call. Although I have never personally experienced an engine failure, I cannot count the times my instructor has killed the engine on me to prepare me for the worst. When the power is cut off, you have precisely 1 moment to panic before you must make all kinds of decisions. These decisions include what settings you should adjust, what angle to fly on, who you should alert, and what paddock to land in. You must understand, in the past, I've struggled to make decisions about what to eat for lunch. When you're in the sky, approaching the ground without an engine, you don't have time to and haw and ask what somebody else thinks. Your decision-making process takes on a new kind of meaning. After practicing these emergency procedures that pushed me to critically assess my surroundings and act accordingly, I started to make better decisions on the ground. 2. Through learning to fly, I found out that I am impulsive, but that I can build patience with practice. When you are approaching the ground at 130 kilometres an hour, the last thing you think about is patience. Patience, my instructor called out to me as I came in for a rough landing. But what about the trees at the end of the runway? I cried back. I was soon to find out that if you land a plane too quickly, the plane will bounce along the runway like a basketball, potentially causing serious damage to both the plane and its passengers. But if you have patience and slowly land your plane, it will glide onto the runway like butter. I think that this is a particularly useful lesson in an age where so many of us are absorbed in a fast-paced lifestyle. For me, living a fast-paced lifestyle where I can access information and stimulation instantly is beneficial in so many ways. But through my project, I found that there is magic when we slow down and have patience. 3. Learning to fly has taught me that I can develop my self-confidence through flying. The first time I was asked to fly a plane solo, I looked at my instructor and said, "No, thank you." I didn't feel ready. Instead, I felt terrified that I might not have the skills to execute a flight. My next lesson, when I was asked to fly solo, before I could back out, my instructor looked at me and said, "I wouldn't let you go if I didn't think you were ready." Before I knew it, I was lining up on runway 23, preparing to do my first takeoff alone. Shaking, I took a deep breath to center myself before I executed my first solo flight. When I landed, I was grinning ear to ear with disbelief over what had just happened. I was so proud. I am not alone. After my first solo flight, I talked to fellow pilot Louise Millington about her experiences. She said, "It helped me to overcome my fear of heights, my fear of not being good enough. And if I can do that, anyone can do anything." We are all so much more capable than we think we are. Throughout my project, I thought I was learning about a world problem that spans across every country. I thought I was learning about the world pilot shortage crisis. Yet, when I look back over the pages of my journal, I'm struck by how many entries show not world-changing solutions, but character-building lessons. When I engaged in an external problem, I found that my internal reality shifted. I think that we often turn away from the big problems because they can be messy and overwhelming. But I propose that when we lean in to the mishmash of chaos and confusion, we are rewarded with the alchemy of growth, creativity, and freedom. When we are open to the world, as Steiner suggests, we learn about ourselves and grow in strength and spirit, graciously unraveling into who we are meant to be. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, Eleanor. Yes. In terms of my future with flying, I kind of think of it in 3 ways. First of all, I am looking at completing my pilot's license, which I have 2 more hours to go in solo flying, and then I can go for the test. In terms of in terms of next year, I am definitely planning on going further and hopefully getting my navigational lessons done. And I'm very excited to announce that I also got a scholarship for flying, which I hope to do next year. And then in terms of the far future, I do hope to become a pilot. I think my dream would be to do something rurally and maybe with medical supplies or something like that. Thank you. Yes. That's a really interesting question. For me, yes. And it was funny, I was talking to my flight instructor the other day, and he's been flying since he was my age, and I think he's in his 70s. And he said that every time he gets in the plane, it's like it's the first time, and it has never gone away for him either. So I hope that continues for me as well. Yes, Tia.
Did you win portrait competition?
I actually did. It was actually a very sad story about the portrait I drew. I drew a portrait of Oscar Pistorius. And I don't know if anyone knows Oscar Pistorius, but he was a Paralympian who managed to get into the regular Olympics. But unfortunately, a year after I had drawn and won this portrait of him, something very terrible happened and he went to jail. So I can no longer say that he's my hero.
Can you convince me that it's safe to fly?
I hear a lot of people express fear about flying in a small plane. I want to assure you that the forces of flight are the same regardless of the airplane. Planes are designed to fly. There is so much thought that goes into the design process, and even without an engine, they are still designed to fly. And on top of that, I think around 95% of all crashes are due to human error, so nothing to do with the planes, which is why pilots have such rigorous testing, and most of the time they are not allowed to fly. If they have a simple cold or they're feeling a little bit off, they're not allowed to fly. So it kind of ensures that they are always as sharp as they can be to reduce that error. Will you fly?
We have an online question. Where did you do your flight training? Thanks, Carl.
As I may have mentioned before, I did my flight training at Adelaide Soaring Club, based in Gawler. I should be facing this way. I did my flight training at Adelaide Soaring Club in Gawler.
Is it just planes you're interested in flying, or would you be interested in flying other craft like helicopters and gliders?
Yes. I would love to fly a helicopter. When I did that trip over the Grand Canyon in a helicopter, I always thought, this is it. Not planes, helicopters. So in the future, I would love to move into the helicopter sector. I think that helicopters are very different to planes. They fly quite differently, but I think it would be a really good challenge, and I think it makes things accessible in so many other ways because you don't need a runway, you can just drop where you are. So in terms of delivering like medical aid or something like that, I think that would be a really useful skill to have. Thank you.
Tess, we have another question from Kerry online. What advice, first steps would you offer to another who was keen to embark on an aviation journey?
Do it. I think that if you're even thinking about it, I would really, really recommend doing it. When I've told some people about my project, they say that that's something they've been thinking about, and I just want people to know that there is a place you can do it where it is a lot cheaper and more accessible, and it is really positive. But you don't necessarily need to start flight training straight away if you don't want to. I think just getting involved and talking to pilots and, start looking things online, just start getting immersed in it, start reading books about it, and just start to fuel your interest that way. You don't have to go straight into being a commercial pilot and flying an airplane to enjoy the benefits of aviation. Aviation is beneficial in all its forms, and it can be so much more casual than flying a Boeing plane. Any other questions?
Enthusiasm. To the biggest optimist I know, my flight instructor, Carl Faith. You are the first person I've met who has flown to Antarctica just because you can. Thank you for teaching me how to fly and the value of hot cross buns. To my theory instructor, Phil Pullum, I appreciate your patience while you continue to teach me again and again and again about how a static port works. Thank you for believing in my math and science capabilities when I didn't believe in them myself. To the rest of my instructors, interviewees, and pilot friends, Rod Curtin once told me that he had never met a normal pilot. When he first said that, I laughed nervously. But I've come to learn that he is right. None of you are normal. But you are all extraordinary. Thank you for giving me so many people to look up to. To my dad, my sister, and Joe, I want to honour you all. You three inspire me deeply and daily to take risks and try new things. I believe that if it wasn't for you guys always surprising me with adventures, I wouldn't have the curiosity or courage to do this. Thank you. To Mum. Dad always jokes that you are my own personal cheer squad, but your selfless love, timely words of affirmation, vision and strength are like pure gold to me. A dreamer yourself, you have helped me to do what I thought was impossible. Thank you. To the audience, thank you for being so kind and attentive as I spoke today. I have had the honour of speaking to many of you individually, and I am grateful for your support in all shapes and sizes. To my class, here's to facing our fears again and calmly laughing through the turbulence of a Year 12 project. Thank you for celebrating my small wins and supporting me. I am so excited for you to show everyone the magic you have created. Go well. Thank you. Ready, take.
Turn it off for now.
I now have the privilege of welcoming the next speaker to the stage. A person who has an adventurous spirit, and it is evident that it is also in his project. Please welcome Jake Gates.
All sports have more to them than just the activity itself. You cannot hike without a trail. You cannot play soccer without a pitch. And you cannot mountain bike without a mountain bike trail. We don't usually think about how the trail or pitch is made, or how much time, money, and effort goes into its development and maintenance. A lot of people just take for granted that there is something there for them to enjoy. But this is different when it comes to mountain biking. When you start mountain biking, when you are very young, you don't just want to ride, you want to build tracks and jumps around your household or your neighborhood. This is a big thing for mountain biking when you're a kid. I developed a love of mountain biking. Oh, shit. Well. Anyway. I developed a love of mountain biking because I enjoyed riding and the thrill of riding new trails. This led me to competing in a few mountain biking events, which sparked my interest further. To be faster on the bike, I not only needed to know my bike and know how to navigate certain obstacles, I also needed to know learn the best way to ride the trail. This came from riding the same trails, watching other people ride the trails, and finding my own way to ride sections of a trail. The golden thread that has driven me with this project changed a few times along the way as new things happened. At first, it was the idea that I'm going to build a mountain bike trail, ride it, and look back on what I'd achieved. But as this became more possible, the golden thread became each new section, each new feature, and each new challenge that needed thinking and solving. All of this was always inspired by my love of mountain biking and my expectation of riding the finished trail and my knowing it was something I had built. Over the past year, through my project, I've learnt so much more about trail design and building, which has added to my overall riding ability. Knowing how the trails are designed has contributed to the way I now ride them and furthered my ability to mountain bike better. This is what got me thinking when it was time to come up with a project topic. What if I used my knowledge to create something challenging and exciting for others? I hope that this focus will give me a tangible outcome, a trail I could ride and be proud of. Over time, it became so much more, and I became really invested in each section, feature, and new idea. I chose to build a mountain bike trail for my project because of my own interests of the sport itself. I was interested in the whole process behind building a mountain bike trail because all trails are built different and all trails are built to be ridden differently. As part of this, I wanted to learn about how to build a trail sustainably and what makes it sustainable. Mountain biking has become increasingly popular and will continue that way. The construction and development of venues in rural areas and communities has provided economic benefit to local communities. Sports Australia estimates that 341,000 Australians participate in mountain biking. So it's important to educate people on sustainable trail practices. Over the past few years, I have ridden mountain bike trails all over the Adelaide Hills, mainly at Fox Creek and O'Halloran Hills. But I have also done a few trips to other places around Australia. In 2018, I did a trip with my dad and brother to Derby and Medina in Tasmania. The week I rode in Derby, I rode some of the best trails I had ever ridden, which is when I started thinking about trail design because of how special the trails were to ride and how beautiful the environment was to ride in. It is a reclaimed mining area, now forested, and absolutely stunning to be in. Mountain bike riders rely on well-made trails so we can enjoy and challenge ourselves when riding. Over the last year, I used my prior knowledge combined with skills learnt over the year to achieve this dream of building a rideable trail that others and I could enjoy. Before I started the building process, I attended a 2-day workshop on sustainable trails development, which backed up my knowledge from work experience I did in Year 10 with 2 different trail building companies. From this, I learnt so much more about different ways to make a trail sustainable, what works and what doesn't. One of the main takeaways for me was how important it is to make sure that trail users stay on the trail and what can be done to assure that they do. Another opportunity I had, which fueled my project, was to play a small role in the Victor Harbour mountain bike strategy, run by a company called Tourism, Recreation and Conservation, or TRC. I met with senior consultant Chris Housted, and my main role was to observe the process by meeting with him every 2 weeks and discuss what they were undertaking. As part of this, I was asked if I would map the illegal mountain bike trails that had been built on the bluff in Victor Harbour. This was part of their trails audit that they were doing for the Victor Harbour area. This work involved riding and walking the trails, using a GPS to record location and documenting the conditions, which were obviously going to become mudslides and erode the area. After I collected the GPS data, I took it to a family friend who is an expert at GIS mapping, and he helped me create the map, which was of a standard that could be used by the consultants at TRC. The Victor Harbour mountain bike strategy has been prepared to guide the collaborative planning, development and activation of a mountain bike trails network in the Victor Harbour area, with links to the broader Fleurieu Peninsula. People make illegal trails as they want to increase their ride fun, but they are often poorly designed and end in erosion and site damage. So having a clear plan for a region, area and site is critical. To understand my project better, let me explain a bit about trails and sustainability. Mountain bike trails are designed to make you ride them a certain way, using different trail ratings and features. This is where my project idea started. I wanted to make my own trail in a way that I would want to ride it. Although it was hard to imagine the end product as a whole, I could already imagine the opportunities for jumps and other sections that I knew I wanted to build. This would very much rely on the landscape, things like big rocks, fallen over trees, logs and soil type. In the end, these will be what influence my trail design, ideas and outcomes. So I began exploring trail sustainability and design. When looking into mountain bike trails, sustainability is one of the most important things to think about. And I wanted to use that as a major focus for my project. I knew I couldn't come up with a new way to build a sustainable trail, but I wanted to go through the whole process myself, with my goal being to build a mountain bike trail with minimum impact, ride it the way I designed it to be ridden, and ultimately provide a trail that me and others could enjoy. Although my trail was going to be built sustainably, I had to remember that building it in the first place would have minor impacts on the surrounding environment. Luckily for me, there were multiple aspects that would create long-term benefits for the area and offset and outweigh the minor impact. Sustainable trails can balance many elements with little impact on the environment. With proper design and construction, they can combat erosion and blend into the surrounding area. Sustainable trails provide a variety of users with enjoyable and challenging experience without too high of an environmental cost. The key principles for sustainable trails outlined in the IMBA's trail solutions include rolling contour trails, understanding grade, the 5 elements of sustainable trails, and trail difficulty rating. Rolling contour trails combat erosion by using a gentle grade. Undulations could grade reversals, and a tread that commonly tilts or outslopes towards the downhill edge of the trail. This allows water to drain in a non-erosive manner called sheet flow. And you can do this. Another step to avoid erosion is not to create a trail that is too steep, and you can do this by understanding grade. Grade is an objective measure of steepness that is expressed as a percentage and is used to measure the slope of landscaping and trails. A grade of 10% or less is the most sustainable trail grade and is known as the 10% average guideline. The half rule is where a trail grade should not exceed half the grade of the hillside or slide slope. For example, a hillside with a grade of 20% means that the trail should not exceed a grade of 10%. The trail difficulty rating keeps less experienced riders off hard trails where they would likely create other routes to dodge difficult features. These things together would provide a basis for all sustainable trail design and construction. First, I had a dream. Then I had a problem. Where was I going to build? Originally, the trail was going to be built for the public, with or for a trail building company, as this was the easiest way to get permission to build. However, this option did not eventuate. This left me worried and thinking about other options. And because my property was not nearly big enough to build a trail on, I became a bit lost. Before I had a site to build my project was definitely a low point for me. And I didn't know how I was going to make my project happen. Fortunately, I met a family friend's neighbour who was instantly on board with me building a trail on his property. From this, I learnt that using any contacts, even if it's just telling someone about your project, could give you a completely new opportunity that you'd never thought about. Later, Nick became my mentor, as he has previously worked in the trail building area. This was the most significant part of my project's success. I knew that I now had almost endless opportunities ahead, which got me very excited. Being given this opportunity was perfect, and the beginning of the build was the highest point of my project. I was so grateful and lucky to have been given this opportunity. The project site in Crafers was half on an area that had previously been burnt, and the other half was highly impacted by woody weeds. This made it easier to avoid most areas of native vegetation and completely avoid any areas of endangered plants. The landscape was a steep and rocky gully with a small creek at the bottom that flowed into a larger creek further down. One of the things I loved the most about my project was having a site that was hidden in a secluded gully with a small creek surrounded by nature. It was so refreshing, and I loved being in that environment to build the project. It was somewhere where I could just stop work and sit for a few minutes and look around at where I was. Even when you're mountain biking, you want to be somewhere beautiful. So I was super lucky to have this site. Then I began the building process. The first step was to mark out the trail. At this moment, I stood looking down into the gully and could see endless opportunities ahead. Although I didn't yet know where the trail would go, I could imagine myself riding through this area and how that would feel. Using my knowledge, I marked out the trail, carefully selecting a route that would be the most sustainable. I then worked with Nick to get agreement on the alignment of the trail to make sure he was happy with where I wanted to go. Step 2 is clearing the trail corridor. Clearing the trail corridor is the first step in construction and is usually completed for the entire trail. Trail corridors, width and height, can create a certain riding experience. There are a few factors to consider though: vegetation type and growth rate, the type of trail users, the trail difficulty, trail flow, and the speed of users. With these factors in mind, trail corridors can greatly differ in width and height. My method of building was to start by removing ground cover, big branches and rocks. Then I began removing surface cover and flattening it out while making sure the trail was wide enough and stable on its downhill edge. As I built, I would go ahead and do rough ground cover clearance for the next section. This helped me to envision the next bit of the trail before I came back and built the trail tread. On top of this, I had to decide where certain features would go. My prior knowledge was helpful when beginning the build. I could build a section, learn what worked, and improve as I went on. Because of the burnt and weedy areas, the trail corridor was already quite open, and I moved on to the trail tread quite quickly. The next step was building the features. Features are what define a trail. Personally, jumps are the best. It's hard to describe the feeling of taking off on a big jump and making the landing, especially if you've built it yourself. When building a jump, you want to create a nice, smooth flow on the approach, takeoff, air, and landing. Jump should have a gradual transition from the approach to the jump face and the lip, followed by a long, wide landing that allows for a soft touchdown. Some jump types are step-ups, step-downs, and level jumps. On my trail, I built a gap jump and a step-down. The next features were berms, or in-slope turns. My trail only needed a few small berms in the right spots for making sure you could maintain flow and speed. In-slope turns are designed to improve trail flow and be fun to ride, but they can be hard to drain. They are longer and usually turn 180 degrees, whereas berms are for shorter turns that keep the rider going fast. Berms can be built using rocks, logs, dirt, or by digging into the hill. I used all of these methods to build the berms in my trail. To build a berm, you start by working out how long the turn will need to be. Once you have this, you can build up the back of the berm, then create a gentle slope from the bottom to the top of the berm. This slope varies depending on the size of the turn and the speed that you'll be hitting it at. The next feature was creek crossings and rock armouring. Armouring is a method used to prevent a trail from erosion, using large rocks to pave sections of trail. It is used to elevate trail tread above soft or wet terrain or to harden the surface, preventing user-caused erosion. My trail needed to have 2 creek crossings near the bottom of the trail. There are multiple ways of building creek crossings. I chose to use a method of rock armouring called flagstone paving. Flagstone paving is when you get a large flat-faced stone and place them directly on mineral soil. For this, I had to dig out my creek crossings, get rid of all the organic matter, and then I could start placing the stones in. After this, I made sure the surface was flat and stable. During this process, I learnt more about my physical and mental capacity, as well as gaining and refining my knowledge and skills on trail building. I felt as if my body couldn't keep up with all the things I wanted to build. Luckily, my brother, Till, was around enough to give me the extra physical help I needed. My trail took many hours of physical labour, but what I created was more than I imagined possible at the beginning. This was no easy feat and took many hours of labour to physically remove 2 large pine trees and many large shrubs from the path. I got introduced to the tree popper, which is used to lift trees out of the ground, as well as using a chainsaw, pruning saw, and lots of sweat and grunt. Through this process, hundreds of large erica weeds were removed from the path, which added to my overall sustainability and will also greatly help with access for future weed control throughout the gully and hillside. Although there weren't many, the lows of the build came from physical fatigue, sections that were difficult to work with, and time. I had to build a lot in not much time, about 3 months, because it took so long to find somewhere to build. I overcame the physical fatigue by working slowly and reserving energy. Ultimately, the idea of finishing the trail is what pushed me through, and after finishing each section, I always had a drive to start the next. Towards the end of the build, as another part of my community aspect, and offsetting any minimal impacts created from the trail construction, I submitted an application for a heritage agreement grant of $9,000 to manage woody weeds and feral deer on the property neighbouring the site where the trail was being built. The applications are still being assessed, so we don't know the outcome of this just yet. I absolutely love building this trail. Going to the site each week was like a reward for me. This project was what kept me going through the year. It wasn't a task, as I loved the physical place, the physical nature of the work, and the journey. The most exciting part of my project was the whole building process, where I could just look forward to riding it at the end and build everything with the expectation that riding it would be fun. I was lucky to not have much rain, but even if I did, I wouldn't have been bothered, as I was always dirty and sweaty. At the beginning of the year, I set out to build a flowy technical single-track mountain bike trail with elements of berm turns, rock armouring, log jumps, and rocky drop/technical sections. Building a trail from scratch and by hand was a physically challenging process that involved mental discipline and the will to keep going. I easily overcame these two things through my love and enjoyment of building a mountain bike trail. Being a mountain bike rider, I had a drive to finish my trail because I couldn't wait to ride it and knew that riding it would be the most rewarding feeling to do once it was finished. To build a sustainable mountain bike trail, I had to minimize impacting the environment, plan and construct a trail that required little maintenance, and remove a large area of weeds to create my trail corridor, thereby improving the native vegetation on the site. I believe that the objectives of my project were met, and I feel very satisfied with what I achieved. Mountain biking does impact the environment, but if built correctly, it is easy to make a trail sustainable, to last a long time, and to have very minimal impacts on the environment. I learned that there is always more to the things you love. Mountain biking isn't just about riding a bike down a trail in a nice place. It's about the trail design, construction, and how that makes you ride and feel. There's nothing like building something that can give you a thrill and adrenaline rush all in one. On October the 31st, I sat on my bike at the top of my trail, ready to drop in. This was the reward. And although the trail could be tweaked in a few spots, it was fast, fun, and rode just how I wanted it to. Ooh. Are there any questions? Yes.
Well done, Jake. I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about the process of whether you have to like upkeep the trail and like the maintenance of it, and whether you have to keep like making it good as it ages.
So with sustainable trails, usually they're made so you don't have to do too much maintenance, but obviously over time, if you go back and see where water has eroded it, there are certain things you can do to stop that and fix areas, but mostly not too much maintenance. Yeah. This is Liam.
Thanks, Jake. That's really exciting. A couple of questions. What grade is it? How long is it? Is it open to people to come ride at some stage?
So Nick wants to open it up to the public and build some more trails to connect it through. I'm not sure how long that would take, but I think if someone does want to ride it, yeah, I can let them in. Yeah. And I'm not exactly sure about like what its rating is. I've sort of made it so that you can avoid all obstacles so that it's, I guess, family friendly. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Jake. So you talked a little bit about making it waterproof so that the rain doesn't go down. How has it survived in the recent rain?
Yeah, well, that was actually one of the problems I had, or I guess worries, was that there was quite a bit of rain just before I was meant to finish it. But luckily it sort of just, it was fine. It survived it and it was all good. So I guess it's been built well enough. Yeah.
Fantastic, Jake. 2 questions. Is there gravel put on it, or is it literally just the earth that you're riding on that you've cleared the land?
So it's not gravel. I haven't brought anything into it and in to build it, so it's just what was there. Yeah, so that's what I used to build everything there.
Mm-hmm. And when you were testing it, did you come off at any time?
I almost did the first time I went down it, but other than that, no, it was fine. Yeah. Yes.
And how often do you ride it, Jake? And what are you doing on Sunday?
I've been there probably 2 times to ride it so far. Obviously, lots of school stuff to do, so I haven't really got out there and spent a full day, but planning to soon. Yeah. Yes, Naheem.
I saw in the video that you had the blue markers. Can you talk about them?
Oh yeah, so they were when I was initially marking out the trail. So that was me going through, putting them on the upside of where the trail would be along the whole thing so that I could show Nick like where I wanted to do it, and then he just gave me a bit of feedback on what he thought was best. Yeah.
Well done, Jake. I'm wondering about whether you have any specific advice for the Class 11s in terms of they're currently deciding their projects at the moment. And second question, I'm wondering how it's impacted you doing the project you chose. So Year 11s first.
I think for me, like, obviously it was something I'd already enjoyed and already sort of wanted to pursue in some way. So maybe just think of like things you enjoy and think of other ways you could do that, or something that could relate to something you enjoy, because that always makes it easier, like if you really enjoy it.
Jake, Kathy's watching at home and she would like you to describe the feeling of riding it that first time.
It's actually a bit scary. Some of the bits I wasn't really expecting. It wrote a lot faster than I was expecting. It was it was good though. It was fun, but yeah.
Jake, what have you learnt about yourself in this process? How have you grown?
I think the whole process, just like having something to do, something that I wanted to do that was for school, was like really good for me. Obviously, I just really enjoyed it, and I think that that's the best part for me. Yeah. Any other questions? First, I'd like to thank my supervisor, Robin. Thank you for all your guidance over this year. I know it took a long time to get my stuff moving, but you were always patient, and you always made sure I knew what I was going to do next. Thank you. I would like to thank Nick Barker. Without the opportunity he gave me, this project wouldn't have been possible. Thank you for being so laid back and so open to my ideas, and for the guidance when I wasn't sure what to do next. I'd like to thank Jess for introducing me to Nick, which let my project take off. I'd thank you for lending me tools when I was around and always being so welcoming. I'd like to thank Chris for the opportunity that he gave me at the start of the year. I learnt a lot. I'd like to thank my brother Teal for always helping with building my trail. It was always great to have someone else there to bounce ideas off and give second opinions on what to do next. I'd like to thank my mum for always making sure I was staying on track with my project, and for all the help with removing weeds on my trail. Lastly, I would like to thank my dad for pushing me to do work, reminding me that I could be out doing my project work when I wasn't, and helping to get the initial trail tread down. Thank you. To the class, thank you for always being so joyful and so happy. It's great to always have that around. And lastly, thanks to Elise and Eleanor for always being there when you need something. Thank you. Next, I would like to welcome a dear friend of mine who is always looking for new ways to improve the world. Please welcome Jozzie Pitt.
Can you turn me on? Can you turn it on? How can I use my privilege and creativity to shine light on the current issues in the fashion industry and create sustainable change for the future? This question holds many important elements within it for me. Arriving at it conclusively allowed me to reflect on the importance of gratitude for my place in this world, as well as my part in bettering the aspects that I can control. I have always loved clothes. I love the way that they have allowed me to connect with family through op shopping trips, hand-me-downs, and sewing projects. I've loved the way that they have allowed me to strengthen and shape the ways in which I see my identity and those around me. I love the way that clothes are art, a way a vision can come to life and be a part of you. Experiencing and learning about the uglier side of the clothing industry this year and the importance that consumers can put on clothes to make them feel like they are enough allowed me to see my own responsibility in the world clearer than ever before. I can never seem to pinpoint exactly where this passion or this project started. I think it has been a combination of the influence of those around me, my passion for creating, and the increased media attention on this topic in the last few years. As I sat beneath the ash tree in the park behind school in November of 2020, I realised that I wanted to research the fashion industry in its entirety, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and most importantly, what my part in improving it could look like. I plan to work in several different ways, and as you can see behind me, these included 2 distinct sections with an overarching goal to contribute to the sustainable future that I dreamed of. I wanted to host my own clothes swap and create an accessible and easily replicated community event. And through this experience, further my involvement in sustainable fashion events into the future. I also wanted to make my own sustainable collection of clothes that could allow me to learn the vital skills to be the conscious consumer that I wanted to be. The issues within the majority of the fashion industry were overwhelming to me in magnitude throughout this year. Researching the growth of the fashion industry and its head towards fast fashion started a fire within me to want to create change and implement change into my own life, as well as the lives of those around me, hopefully. The exciting part was that I could see hope and achievable ways for us all to start to create a much-needed change. I would like you to imagine the simple white t-shirt that sits in your wardrobe. The one that you probably bought from Kmart or Cotton On and cost under $10. This is not intended to tell you to never buy a t-shirt again, but instead to be aware of some of the effects that just one item of clothing has, and therefore be informed about what your overall footprint could look like. Let's say that this t-shirt is made out of a combination of cotton and polyester, as most of them are. And so, this is where the story begins, in the production of textiles for the apparel industry. Just one soft, lightweight cotton t-shirt uses approximately 2,700 litres of water to produce. It also uses an excessive amount of agrochemicals, polluting waterways and threatening biodiversity, as well as local workers. That same crop could have heavily degraded the soil quality in the area that would therefore no longer be able to grow another cotton plant in years to come. The polyester that is combined with the cotton to create the stretchy, comfortable feel of your t-shirt is just as harmful, if not more so. Polyester, derived from oil and requiring a huge amount of energy to produce, will not only exhaust healthy natural resources and pollute the environment in its production period, but also throughout its entire life cycle. Every time you wash your t-shirt, it will release approximately 1,900 fibres of microplastic into waterways and the ocean. At the end of its life cycle, when you go to drop the worn, stained t-shirt into the bin, since it was never made of an entirely natural material or thread to sew it up, it will never biodegrade, staying in landfill for up to 200 years. Another topic that I would like to briefly help you be aware of is fashion's effect on people. It is hard to see or understand who made your t-shirt and in what conditions they were in from the outside. The extremely unethical and unsustainable ways in which workers in the fashion industry are treated keeps hundreds of people in danger, poverty, and modern slavery. As a fellow human being, I was heartbroken when I read about some of the personal accounts of working in the industry. And yet the idea that all of this pain was only degrading and slowly ruining the planet also angered me further. If the current production methods of not only working people, but also the planet continued, I knew that not only at some point would the industry collapse because the Earth would not be able to support it, but it would also continue to bring huge rifts between people on a large scale all over the world. All of this, although heavy, and only some of the biggest aspects of a huge issue, I knew what I'd set out to do. And I knew that just like so many before me, so many sustainable businesses, and so many conscious consumers, I too had the privilege to tap into those yucky feelings and create my own innovative solution. I wondered if this very knowledge that I now had in my life was more powerful than I gave it credit for in creating change. Here, I feel like there could be thousands of things that I could recommend to you. I could go through every store that I have found is contributing to the horrors of the fast fashion industry. I could tell you where to shop, but I'm not going to. Because despite the importance of sticking to your morals when you choose where to put your money, I also know how unreachable the $199.50 hemp t-shirt is. And especially for me, as a Year 12er with approximately $2.50 in my bank account today. So instead of asking you to do the impossible and flip your life upside down and stop buying mainstream fashion altogether, I instead ask you to look for more good than bad. The good being the glimmers of hope and innovation that glow brighter with each and every person that chooses to step towards them. I have found also that these glimmers of light that exist in doing good actually spreads into you too and instills in you an inspiration to do better for the people in the world and the earth that provides so much for us. I present to you the iconic 5 R's of sustainable fashion, something that could be quite familiar to some of you. Reduce, rewear, recycle, repair, and lastly, resell. By taking you through the ways in which each of these steps can be implemented into any life effectively, I hope that I'm able to leave you with just one tip that can help you move forwards more mindfully. By reducing what you have and decluttering your space, you have the power to treasure the significance of each piece of clothing and create a wardrobe that you truly love, feel confident in, and feel like yourself in. With reducing your wardrobe also comes the significance of re-wearing outfits and taking the importance out of having to change an outfit, even if it is for special events, for example. If you find yourself with clothes that you no longer want or need, turn towards donation, and not just in the sense of op shops or charities that provide for the less privileged, but also to places with facilities to recycle worn clothing. This may seem a bit alien, but Patagonia, for example, already take back any old, worn-out clothing and recycle them into new ones? What if you can't find the exact fit of pants you want? Or the hems are too long? Or your hoodie zip is broken? Or all of your buttons have fallen off your favourite dress? Learn to repair. Simple, creative skills can bring an item back to life. It can make something ugly into something beautiful. And it can save items that you thought were ready for the bin. I know you are probably like, yep, I'm fully capable and aware of that one. I've been patching holes and crocheting since before you were born. I forgot to account for the fact that I'd be presenting this project to a room full of Waldorf families. And lastly, and for a broke Year 12er like myself, the most exciting one. Remember, you can always resell your quality items. You can use apps such as Depop, or simply join a Facebook group if that's easier for you. But I promise you right now that selling on something that you bought for all of that money, which you so frustratingly turned out hating and not wearing, will cancel out any of the guilt. The last few ways that I would recommend consuming clothing, other than buying it brand new in an educated manner, is op shopping, swapping or sharing clothes as I've explored through this project, or renting more expensive items like formal dresses or suits. Last, but in no ways least, continue to be open to current knowledge around best consumer practice, even if that is finding a new vintage market to attend to in the holidays, or demanding transparency and improvement from your favourite brands. If you are unsure of where to start, I would highly recommend the Good On You app, which will allow you to look up any brand and check its sustainability rating, considering things from workers' wages through to carbon footprint and animal testing, and will also give you more sustainable alternatives with a similar style if the brand that you are looking at hasn't met your new and improved standards. With all of this research and collated information under my belt, I returned to my goals that I had made in Term 2. And just like adding water to a dry sponge, they sprang to life and held more purpose than ever before. I started firstly with the intent to meet the first goal that I had set, which was to learn about sustainable fashion events and host a clothes swap. I spoke to my mentor about how I would go about hosting one that would work the most smoothly, both for me and the community that I was working with. I then completed a risk assessment and a proposal before reaching out to the Mount Barker Community Centre. When I heard that they were happy to support my idea, I created flyers and posted my event on Facebook with the layout of the day. It all began to come together with the help of many wise words from experienced clothes swappers and my level-headed mentor and supervisors. I felt pretty chilled out about it and got stuck into the organisation of things instead of worrying too much about it, up until the Saturday before I had it planned. As a chronic overthinker and someone with a strangely vivid imagination, I began to freak out. Would it be a weird community event where only like 2 people came and there was a strange person, me, lurking in the corner, unsure of what to do with myself, left at the end of the day with a huge pile of old grotty clothing to deal with? Well, I'll give you the good news. That didn't happen. Saturday the 12th of June rolled around and I went in early to set up tables, racks, and a few bags of clothes that I had gathered from family and friends. I put on music and began welcoming in a small trickle of people and laying out the clothes that they had brought. I had genuinely no idea what I was doing, but I was figuring it out as I went along, and not without the help of so many generous people around me. The clothes swap was so much fun. So many of my friends, as well as people that I didn't know, found beautiful new outfits which they were so excited about. The feedback that I got from people from the wider Mount Barker community touched me the most, as they were so excited about an event like this in the Adelaide Hills, and it made me feel as if I had met the goal that I had wanted to. getting local people inspired about more accessible, sustainable fashion events. This clothes swap was small scale, but perfect in my eyes, and easy to set up and pack away. I knew, however, that I desperately needed to get on with the practical aspect of sewing for my project. We were also shortly after hit with another lockdown, a new strain of COVID and a tightening of restrictions. And so I found it too difficult to organise another one in the wider Mount Barker community in the same year. Instead, organising one for the next year ahead and holding a smaller one at lunchtime in term 3 for the high school. I also volunteered at a clothes swap run by the Adelaide Sustainability Centre on October the 22nd, which allowed me to gain further inspirations and connections for the future. All of the excess clothing, which was so thankfully not too overwhelming due to the responsible participants, was donated to non-for-profit op shops around the Adelaide Hills and Adelaide to give back whenever I visited them, as well as future clothes swaps. As I mentioned, the practical aspect of my sewing for my project had been quite neglected up until June, July and August. It is ironic that I continue to avoid it even now, as I have left it as far towards the end today as possible. I was scared of not being able to sew to the level that I wanted to. I was scared of not being able to create clothes at all and be standing up here only to tell you that I had nothing. I believed that I was hardly capable of getting through year 12, let alone making a collection of clothes that people would actually want to wear. I was quite simply debilitated by self-doubt and the fear of mucking it all up and wasting time, energy and resources on something that just simply wouldn't be good at all. Throughout the middle of the year, I experienced numerous false starts. Like a motor coming to life at last, only to cut out again when you put it into drive. In essence, the theory of what I was trying to do should have been working, but I just couldn't get it rolling. This isn't to say that I hadn't even thought about sewing. Boy, had I thought about it. I had planned, made vision boards, and spent hours on Pinterest and sustainable business websites. I'd spent months throughout February, March, and April trying to work out what aspects of this colossal issues I would be able to tackle in this more creative way, and how, therefore, I would be able to guarantee that my collection would be a sustainable one. A day at the beach in mid-April was the first step towards a slow and steady starting of my practical. As I sat there, I realised that I had been looking at the extremely overwhelming issues to the individual, such as global warming or modern-day slavery, and that I would never be able to get started from that standpoint. I wondered instead what it would look like if I took these main values that I now had in my life: a need to protect our precious planet, and the importance of sharing and supporting each other as a human collective, and created something from there, allowing it to be personal and interpreted in my own way. This is where I experienced my biggest and most successful light bulb moment. What if my collection of clothing could be inspired by my love of nature and the ocean, as well as my care for all people around me and anywhere in the world? From here on, this idea drove everything that I decided on. And so in July, I at last started my final pieces. It wasn't straightforward. It took at least a month to finish my first piece, and I had another notable setback of inspiration. But leading up to Showcase in September, I learnt quicker than I ever have before. I learnt how to perfect my pattern following and altering skills, use an overlocker well, create a pattern from an existing piece of clothing, how to make buttonholes, how to gather, how to place darts correctly to create shaping, how to alter clothing once finished to sit perfectly on the person that I wanted them to, and much more. With the constant time, support and effort from my mentor Vanessa, I created my 4 pieces. Showcase was the night that it all came together for me. And the literal blood, sweat and tears that had led me to getting to that place, not only practically, but also emotionally this year, was suddenly so worth it. They were more than just 4 simple pieces to me. They were the story of my learning and my growth. My pieces, a lightweight, classic, 100% organic linen dress, a unisex, versatile pair of organic cotton hemp pants, an organic cotton hemp shirt, and lastly, a simple, alterable, unisex pair of organic linen hemp overalls completed my simple yet communicative collection. The collection is informed by this project and all of my research, but also all of my personal values and interpretations. As a unified and balanced collection, my pieces are each inspired by a love of nature and the ocean, as well as my care for people around me and anywhere. My pieces in design are simplistic, versatile, and inclusive, and as many sustainable brand owners also state, timeless and unaffected by the ever-changing trends of the fast fashion industry. My pieces were birthed in creativity, will be worn with gratitude, and will not, at any stage of their life cycle, harm the precious earth that we walk on. I now not only have the power to make informed consumer choices and create accessible and inspiring events to bring community together, but also to turn to and trust my creativity to make sense of and begin to tackle intrinsic large-scale issues in the world. Therefore, if I have left anything with you today, I would like it to be this message. Each and every one of you has the potential to change your world. The world that you experience, the world that your community experiences, and maybe one day the world that we all experience. If you learn to trust that creativity, those ideas that live so vividly in your mind, and push past that huge barrier of self-doubt and world doubt and unknown, you can create change. This year taught me this lesson and allowed me to feel a renewed connection to the planet and its incredible generosity, yet fragility, as well as the people that walk upon it, from you and me to those who are much further removed from us and are just as deserving of love, comfort, and security. I've been left with an overwhelming feeling of gratitude that I was able to research the fashion industry this year and find joy in making change instead of overwhelm, something that I didn't know was possible at the beginning of this year. I smile in satisfaction when I think of the clothing that I have made and the lessons that I've been able to share with even the smallest number of people, whether that be through conversations at Showcase or more practical clothes swaps. I hope that you can all know how important you each individually are and how much your choices, ideas, and inquisitiveness mean to me and the rest of the world in which we live. You are powerful beyond measure, and we are the future. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, Dan. No worries.
I was wondering, Joz, if you could speak to why you chose linen, and I've also noticed the lack of dye as well. Could you talk to that?
Yeah, of course. So I know I was saying a lot about how they had a connection to nature, but I didn't really elaborate on what that meant. So the way that I saw that was using natural, raw, kind of textured materials, which were made straight from a natural source, such as flax. That would easily just biodegrade and compost into the earth, so without too much dye or anything like that. So it could be completely circular in its process. And linen, for example, is similar to hemp and other materials like that, is naturally not very harmful to the environment. So compared to conventional cotton, for example, it just naturally uses a lot less water and pesticides to grow and doesn't degrade the earth as much. And in the same way, that's why I chose to choose organic materials, which had a much less impact on the earth. Yes, Phil? Oh, sorry. It's hard to see with the lights.
Thanks, Jozzie. That was awesome. Did you discover if Australia is doing really well with the clothing, sustainable clothing market?
I haven't got any stats for you, I'm sorry. But in researching this project, I was overwhelmed with the amount of sustainable fashion brands that are around. Going into it, I thought that there was nothing and it was just all bad and horrible and overwhelming. But yeah, there's thousands I could list to you that are doing really well and have incredible innovative ideas. So I definitely think Australia is doing well and we can get to somewhere really awesome. You're welcome.
All right, we've got one from online. How has this project shaped or impacted your own wardrobe and dress sense?
Well, I've definitely done a lot of wardrobe clear-outs this year. I've also felt an extreme amount of guilt whenever I've wanted to go to Cotton On. But being able to keep some of these pieces and have more of an eye for what could be a really versatile and timeless piece of clothing has been a renewed value to me. And I think I'll forever move forwards with a lot of knowledge to have a wardrobe and buy clothing that supports everything around me.
Thanks, Jozzie. Could you just talk sometimes about the stigma of clothes swap? Did you come across that? Is that a barrier? How do you see people overcoming that? Is there a stigma associated with people swapping clothes? Did you experience that in any way?
Thank you. I didn't look a lot into the stigma, but as I said before, my imagination got the better of me and I definitely thought of having like a dingy little clothes swap, and I think that could be a bit of a stigma around it. I'm not sure though. However, in experiencing clothing swap events in Adelaide at the start of the year, I realised how professional and how beautiful they could be. So I think normalising that can help us move towards so many new ways of shopping and consuming clothing.
That was great, Joz. You talked about it took you a little while to get to the sewing. How do you feel about sewing now? Is it something that you'll continue on with, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So being able to be taught by such a professional Vanessa has been amazing, because that was one of my goals, to be able to whip up something in the future if I wanted to, and even create birthday presents for people or have something that I could give to others. So I think the basic skills that I've learnt and more that I want to work on as well is going to be really awesome into the future and something that I want to keep as a real hobby throughout the rest of my life.
Joz, there's another online question. A big congrats from Canberra, Jozzie. I'd love to know what you plan to do with the skills experience you've gained from this project for the future.
Well, as I was just saying, I'd love to keep sewing and creating things for myself and for those around me. I'd also continue to love to work within the community a lot more because that gave me a real purpose, and just find joy in something that we can all share together.
Congratulations, lovely Jozzie. Can you talk to us about the piece that you are wearing, how long it took, and whether that is one of your original pieces?
I have something really embarrassing to admit to you, Grace.
Yes.
Have you got any idea what it is? I didn't actually make this piece I'm wearing today. I did make something, but I put it on last night and thought, this looks horrible. So I went to my best friend and I asked her if I could borrow one of her clothes, one of her dresses, because that's what we do. We share our clothes around to be sustainable. And yes, I thought it really matched it, but I also knew that I was going to prank someone. So thank you for answering that question.
Got another audience question, online audience, from Kathy. Have you explored zero waste patterns or other ways to reduce or manage fabric scraps from making clothing?
So I would like to get into more specifically zero waste patterns in the future. I didn't particularly stick to that in this project, but one of the skills that my mentor taught me is how to change things up and be brave enough to lay out patterns in different ways to what the pattern might tell you. So I think I have a bit of general knowledge on how to really conserve fabric when I'm making things, and I'd like to continue to establish that skill. Alrighty.
I was wondering where you sourced your sustainable fabrics and how much that cost you roughly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I sourced my fabrics from a wonderful online store called Hemp Wholesale Australia, which is based in WA. I bought the fabric for my first piece from a little shop called The Drapery on Geo Road, and that took a big chunk out of my bank account. But finding a wholesale place to shop from had a huge impact on me saving money, and that was wonderful. So I actually bought, for example, the hemp and organic cotton mixes for about $17 a metre. So that was really, really wonderful to find that. Yeah.
That was great, Joz, thanks. The selection of men's clothing in op shops is typically underwhelming. So I wonder if you have any thoughts around why that is. What are men doing with all their clothes? Do they just wear them till they fall apart? Or?
Golly, well, I agree with you, because I often think I'm going to be trendy and go to the men's section to grab like a nice cool t-shirt, and there's not usually many options. You know what, I couldn't tell you why that is. I guess maybe they don't buy as much as us. I don't know. And yeah, I hope that in the future it can become a really normalised thing across all genders, all different types of people, to really get into sharing quality items and having passions for the things that are such a big part of who we are. Alrighty, I think
Thank you, Jozzie. We have
up.
one final question from Houtman.
Okay. Sorry, Houtman.
Hi. All right, this thing is working. So I know some people who are against second-hand clothes, which really confused me a lot. Is there anything you would say to them to convince them otherwise?
Well, I don't know if this project has been any testimony to deciding to buy second-hand clothing instead of buying it brand new. That is the main argument I can think of. And also, give it a good wash, and I think you'll be all right. Thank yous. I would first like to thank Nikki and the staff at the Mount Barker Community Centre, as well as Paige at the Adelaide Sustainability Centre, who were instrumental in supporting my clothes swap events and experiences this year. I would like to thank my mentor, Vanessa. I know that neither of us have been very good at consistent catch-ups this year with such busy lives and changing plans. But the amount of time, care, and genuine effort that you have given me this year has been amazing. Thank you for being there for me when I needed you the most. From figuring out what my clothes swap and collection was going to look like, to giving up huge chunks of your time in the lead up to Showcase, where I admittedly cut it pretty fine. I would have simply not have been able to meet half of the goals or get this project to the level that I wanted it to without you. And for that, I am so thankful. To my supervisors, Eleanor and Nick. Eleanor, thank you for your ongoing wisdom, belief, and kindness, as well as resilience throughout this year. I couldn't have done it without you. Nick, thank you for your consistency, sincere care, and wise tips and tricks to get me through such a big year. Thank you to my class for going through this by my side. Knowing that I was at no point alone in this journey was so important to me and taught me so much. I am in awe of each and every one of you and what you have to offer this world. A special thank you to the people who gave up their time for me to help with the setup and pack up and running of my clothes swaps at different points throughout the year. I know that there were so many of you, and even in the smallest moments, it never went unnoticed. Thank you to our guardian, Elise. Thank you for being there for words of advice, encouragement, and sometimes a little push forwards in the right direction. Thank you to all of my dear friends for helping me with... Thank you for believing in me, lifting me up, and helping me find balance. Thank you for being my models and making my pieces look just as beautiful as I had dreamed. Thank you to Shannon Hemmings, who also helped me take such beautiful pictures of my pieces. Grandma, thank you for helping me with the sewing and ordering of fabric this year. Thank you for instilling in me the belief that everything will work out perfectly if I trust the process and myself. Having you as a source of wisdom and such a good friend was incredibly important in my journey this year. Dad, thank you for being my supermodel. You outdid yourself. Thank you for supporting this project and this whole year for me with your work and care. Thank you, lastly, for always reminding me of the importance of perspective and to be grateful. Mum, thank you for constantly worrying about me and therefore your unwavering sacrifice and care for me every day of this year. Thank you for putting up with all of my crap and still sticking by me and making sure I had enough good food and sleep every single day. Milana, thank you for your empathy and patience and belief in me. You are the best friend, and although I am the older one, you teach me so much every day. Thank you for modelling for me with the masks that we made out of the scrap fabric and helping me whenever you could, and especially for putting up with me sewing outside your room at 12:30 a.m. in the morning when you were trying to sleep. Thank you to everyone who is here today, whether that be in the room or through the live stream, and to anyone and everyone who has supported me throughout this year. I am grateful for you all. Thank you. Next, I would like to welcome a very talented individual who has been exploring electronic music and the benefits of purposeful practice this year. Please welcome to the stage, Ned Machin.
Sorry, just loading. Cool. Self-doubt seems to be an intrinsic part of the creative process. Self-doubt can be used as a tool for artists to refine the work they have produced after they have finished it. However, many artists, including myself, find that we experience self-doubt during the process of creating, which can alter the flow of output, or in some cases, stop it altogether. This year, my project focused on the impacts of self-doubt on my own creative work, being music, and how it impacted various other artists, writers, and musicians. It wasn't my idea to start making music, it was my parents. Around 2.5 years ago, I was spending a lot of time on video games, and my parents suggested that I should make some music on some software. Eventually, I transitioned from making music after I finished gaming to making music instead of gaming. I was hooked. It gave me a similar rush to gaming. It was fun, and I was teaching myself a new skill. This time of my production was very experimental and without any pressure to get any better.
Jump to 2021. There I was, sitting at my desk in front of my computer, completely taken over by my thoughts. I wanted to create music for my project that would inspire others and make them feel emotion just like the music I would listen to. But I just couldn't. Each click of a button felt wrong. Each decision I made felt like a step in the wrong direction. This frustrated me, as I thought making music would be fun like it used to be, but it felt too serious this time. I would then shut the program, turn off my computer, and hope that on a later date, some inspiration would come out of nowhere for me to start another song. This was how I felt nearly every time I opened my laptop to make music for my project. It may have been after homework for a bit of fun, or a dedicated session to make music. But this situation occurred far too often. I felt scared that I wouldn't be able to make music to the same level that I previously could. I was trapped in my own head. If you have a job that requires you to have your own ideas, you may have experienced similar feelings to those I described before. This is what is known as self-doubt. I would stop myself from creating music purely because the self-doubt that I would experience stopped me from being confident in my abilities. I used to strongly believe in the myth that creative people are somehow born with imaginative minds, and creativity is something that happens naturally for them. But really, just like most skills, creativity takes practice. I imagine that the time for a painter or a musician to come up with an idea was much less than the average brain because they had special talents and gifts. Through my research and developing techniques my mentor suggested, I found that this myth was not the case at all. What we see as natural talents and gifts is really hundreds of hours of practice in disguise. It took Mozart 13 years and 10,000 hours to be able to compose in a unique style and become popular. Look closely at any creative person's life, and you will see that the overnight success is years in the making. Thinking that creativity was innate impacted the amount of output I was producing. It trapped me and made me feel like I had to be special to make music. What I originally thought I needed was time. Time for ideas to pop up and surprise me. But all I really needed was purposeful practice. So, what is purposeful practice? It is different to normal practice in the sense that you set out to become better at what you're doing. A child who goes home and picks up the cello a couple of times a week for ensemble is practicing. Someone who goes to a basketball court and shoots three-pointers from around the key for 30 minutes straight is practicing with purpose. They are focusing on an area of their craft they need to become stronger in, and not just reaching the sufficient standard, like the string instrument player in Year 3. My mentor guided me to apply this same method of practice for my music. Because I wasn't practicing music with purpose, how could I expect to get any better? Now that my head had freed itself from the mindset that creativity was for the gifted, I was able to jump into the composition. The music genre I've been most drawn to from a young age was electronic music, of any sort. I love the unique sounds and endless amounts of creativity that electronic music can bring to the world. But perhaps you haven't heard or come across electronic music before. If that is the case, I'll give you a brief introduction to what electronic music is, how it works, as well as a bit about how I go about making music and integrated purposeful practice into my production. Electronic music is the creation of sound electronically. Rather than a string vibrating on a guitar, violin, or piano to create a frequency, electronic music is mainly based around analog and digital synthesizers, which has within them the sound-producing component called an oscillator. The analog oscillator, like this one over here, works off of electrical circuits to create a frequency. Simply put, it does this by converting a direct current flow to an alternating current, which oscillates on and off at a desired frequency to create a signal. This one over here can produce the most basic of sound waves, the sine wave. With this knob, we can choose the frequency at which the current is oscillating. This hum you hear is 80 hertz. That was 800 hertz. The digital oscillators work in a similar way, but the current comes from the computer's processor that spits out ones and zeros at a desired frequency to create a signal. Although analog synthesizers do have other options for other waveforms, digital synthesizers can have all sorts of different waveforms, not just the basic sine wave, sawtooth wave, and square wave. We can have more unique looking ones, like this, this, and this. Although they may sound very similar, each waveform has unique attributes that can be brought out with further adjustment. There are endless directions you can take with each waveform. Once you mold the waveforms with other effects and filters, which dampen the sound and give it more character, the sounds start to become more familiar to the listener. If we start with the sawtooth wave, put a filter on it, modulate the filter on and off, pitch it down, add a few little effects and final touches, you may have heard some of these sounds in the music you listen to, even if you don't realize they are there. Those of you who have watched the movie Tenet may recognize the sound I just created. What I find so fascinating about electronic music is its ability to manipulate sound in any way you could imagine, which becomes increasingly possible when you've mastered the techniques of sound design, which unfortunately I've yet to do, as I've only had a year. You can create sounds that no listener has ever heard before or will ever be able to perfectly recreate. There are many ways you can go about creating unique sounds, but one way I found effective was through resampling. Resampling is recording what you've already made in a session and manipulating it further. If I were to start a project and didn't like the direction it was going, I would resample it and try and give it another direction. There's me sitting down to make music and have a goal in mind as to what sort of track I wanted to make, whether it was a sad tune with lots of percussive elements or just a little groove. I would start out by choosing a few sounds, like these. Maybe create a chord progression like this. But the vision for the track was lost. I no longer had any spark to keep moving forward with the original idea. So I would record what I've already made in the session and try and find another way to use the sounds. Not only does resampling give your track another direction, but it makes the sounds you are working with more unique the further you resample them. A technique of resampling I used for 2 of my songs was the combination of a granular synthesizer and a sample slicer. What the granular synthesizer does is it takes tiny snippets of the sample, manipulates them individually, smooths them out so they don't crack or click, rearranges them, and then recombines them to generate the final output. The sample slicer does a similar thing, but instead of rearranging them, it assigns bits of the sample to notes on the keyboard. I would listen to the sounds that I created using these effects and try and come up with a new idea for a song, playing around with different rhythms, changing the pitch, all sorts of things, until I had come up with a new idea. Once I had formed an idea I was happy with, I would flesh it out and make it sound like a real song. An example of this technique is in my song with my wonderfully talented sister, Lucinda, on our track, When She's Dancing. So here we have the original sample, which you heard before. This is what happens when we run it through a granulizer. You can kind of hear remnants of the sample. This is the sample slicer. If we play the notes in chromatic order, you can kind of hear the sample. I then came up with this rhythm using these two effects. Once the idea is fully formed, this is the result of the first chorus. My aim when creating music is to surprise the listener with something they may not have heard before. This was a goal of mine this year, but I don't know how strongly I've succeeded at it yet, as I'm still in my own head about these things. I think the reason for this doubt is because I am constantly comparing the music that I've made this year with the music I listen to daily. If what I've made slightly resembles what I hear elsewhere, I somehow think that it is not unique enough and I'm just copying everyone else, which is a frustrating thought to have, but I know that it is all part of the process. Now that I've briefly explained electronic music and how I go about making music, I want to explain to you how you can become happy with your abilities and output of work in anything you choose. I used to make music at random or whenever I felt like it. I had this weird thought in my head that if I made music too often, I would just burn out and quit after a couple of months. After meeting my mentor, this thinking was put in the bin and completely forgotten. The technique I was introduced to by my mentor was based on the simple idea of consistent practice, but had massive benefits for my creative process and output this year. Similar to the basketball player setting up an in-game scenario of the three-pointer, my mentor set up a situation for me to push my creative thinking. I would open 3 instruments, each with a random preset, as well as 3 drum sounds. I would open a lead, a pad, and a bass sound. To run the drill, I had to try and create something that would make all of these sounds work together. I had 5 minutes to complete this task. And once that time was up, it didn't matter what the result was, I had to save the project. I did this every day for about 5 or 6 weeks, and it not only improved my output of work, but my ability to come up with original ideas much quicker and much more frequently. Although my mentor always said that it didn't matter what the product of the practice was, I'm left with a fair few files of some of the worst music that I've made. For example, going into a creative project like my own, before knowing about purposeful practice, I suspected that I would be waiting around for inspiration to hit and then a song would be formed out of the blue. But this new way of structuring my work nearly tripled my original goal for my output this year. And I want to show you how you can increase your personal output as well. Whether it's table tennis or playing the piano, I'm hoping that these steps can apply to you all. Step 1, identify your weakness. Through my personal experience this year, I found that ironing out the wrinkles in your craft is what will make you become better overall. What you want to do is identify what you are struggling with. This will take a certain amount of self-reflection, so be prepared to observe yourself. Whether what you are bad at is starting conversations, typing fast on your keyboard, or have messy handwriting, you may find that you struggle with looking at your hands instead of the screen when you are typing, are bad at writing the letter B, or can't seem to find the right thing to say when starting a conversation. As long as you are able to identify what you are struggling with or what you are doing wrong, you're already halfway there. Step 2, be conscious when you are practicing. This is where the practice first starts. Let's take starting conversations for an example. You're going to have to push yourself out of your comfort zone in order to get better. You want to be fully conscious that you're doing the practice, otherwise it won't sink in, and you may form excuses for yourself. You may say, I can talk to that person next time, or I'm not in the right headspace to be confident enough to talk to someone. These are just back doors for yourself to slip out of when you're feeling lazy, and this will get you nowhere. Something I found difficult through the year was remembering that I was practicing. At no point did I want music to feel like a chore for me. When it was time to sit down and do my 5 minutes, I found it hard to really concentrate on what I was doing. I may have drifted off or have gone on my phone. I would then have to snap out of it and refocus on the task at hand. Just always remember to stay focused when you are practicing. That way you can fully understand the ins and outs of your craft. You will also be able to observe more of what you're doing wrong if you're concentrating, rather than drifting off and doing the task half-heartedly. Step 3, consistent practice. This is the hardest and most important step out of the 3. Set yourself a goal of how often and how long you are going to practice for, and stick to that schedule. I cannot emphasize enough that your practice will go to waste if you're only doing it maybe once or twice a week for however long you feel. That is not how you will get better. Luckily for me, my mentor wouldn't let me hang up the phone from our meetings until I said with confidence how long and how often I was going to practice for. He wouldn't let me set myself a back door and say things like, I'll probably do 5 minutes a day, or I'll try and practice every day. Be stern with yourself and stick to your plan. In relation to starting conversations, you could set yourself a goal of talking to someone new every day. I can guarantee that you will surprise yourself with the results if you practice every day. The combination of these 3 steps is what helped me become more comfortable and more confident in my production, and I believe that when they are applied with effort, they are a powerful tool that can help you achieve anything you want to become good at. Despite this being a pretty foolproof method to become better, you have to remember that I'm a teenage boy, and nothing is going to be perfect and go to plan. A big thing I've noticed about myself is that I tend to glorify the future. I think that these songs were a bit of a failure, I can just try harder on the next one. But let me tell you, a lot of the songs that I thought would be failures, and I thought I could one-up, ended up on the album that I created for my project. I think I need to take some of my own advice and be present when I'm making music. Some things did go to plan. The best song that I made, in my opinion, was created because I'm a teenager. I was up late, and the creativity was flowing. This was the night I made my favourite song. Fortunately, I captured this moment. You can't hear the audio, but you can clearly see how happy I was with myself. At that moment, I was thinking, I'm so glad I chose music for my project. I was having fun whilst making music, and it sounded pretty good to me. What else could I ask for? Fast track a few months later when I was trying to mix all the songs for the album, and I was in the opposite position. It was 11 p.m. I'd been on the phone to Dad for an hour and a half trying to figure out why on earth my computer couldn't run through the speakers. I would show a photo of this, but I didn't take one of me nearly at the point of crying. I would say the year was a good balance of highs and lows. I've done a full loop this year. When I first found out about purposeful practice, I had no faith in my abilities. I was skeptical and didn't know if I could make a full song or not. Now, I'm having that same doubt in the skills that I've built this year. Because I haven't had the opportunity to make much new music, I'm again losing confidence in myself. It's unlikely, but in my current position, I don't think I could make something that I could have in the middle of the year. But these things happen. Life gets in the way. You become too busy to work on the things you want to become good at. And it feels like you have to start over again. Although it may seem tough, at the pinnacle of my production in the middle of the year, I was almost completely free of my self-doubt. Purposeful practice helped me become the most confident producer I could be, and I believe that it can help you too. It won't take much for me to get back up to that same level I was at before. To get there is simple. I know the trick. You now should know the trick, and it's to practice with purpose. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, Casey.
Good job, Ned. Just wondering, you were mentioning your favourite track. Which one is that? And on that note, where can we find this so-called album?
It's funny you asked that, Casey.
Yeah, I'm really curious.
So, the album is out on all platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, everything, I think. Yeah, just type in Purposeful. You can't find my artist name for some reason. It's Ned with a full stop. But if you type in Purposeful, it should come up. And the favourite track is the one, this one. Yeah. Yes, up the back. Oh.
Well done, Ned. Well done, Ned. On average, how long would you say it would take to make a piece of music, say, a minute long? How much effort and editing would have to go into that 1 minute of finished product?
So it varied very widely across all of the tracks. So there's 14 on the album, and the most I spent on one was, I think, 13 hours. So that was the one you heard before. That was like the most polished track on the album. That went through a whole load of processes. I did mixing within the software, and then I brought it to a mixing desk, and then did it there, and then it was mastered by my mentor. So it was a whole bunch of processes, but I'd say around probably 15 hours all up. Yes, Dan.
That was great, Ned. Really enjoyed it. I was just wondering if you could talk to how you go about the interface of the analog, being maybe your sister's voice, and the digital, and how you kind of work those two together, what you're considering when you're doing that.
Okay. It was all very new to me this year. It was the first time I've actually recorded vocals. So it was mainly an experiment, but how I go about it is I don't know how to say this simply. I mold it into the track itself using varying effects that I think works with the track. So with this track, with Lucinda, the middle section is very like airy and floaty, so I used a lot of reverb for that one to make it sound large. But then I also isolated its sort of own frequency range, so I cut off the lows so it wouldn't meld in with the bass sounds or the kicks or anything. Yeah, it's mainly a process of just molding it into the track so it doesn't sound separate, if that makes sense.
Ned, we have an anonymous one from the live stream.
Yeah.
Who are your idols or those you look up to in the music industry?
Well, it's through the year, it's grown to be my mentor, 100%. He's like the best man ever. He's so kind. He's friendly to absolutely everyone. But in terms of artists that I listen to, I would say Disclosure, Just a Gent, and Flume.
And another question. Do you include celebrating the purposeful practice, like the small milestones such as a week of successful self-disciplined practice? Is that something you celebrate?
No, because I think the reward itself is being good at what you're doing. Because if you practice piano and you're able to just play a song, that should be the reward. I don't think you need to have chocolate or something.
Ned, will you continue to make music, and do you think that now that you're kind of done with your project, you'll find it easier to have ideas and make music?
Answer to the first question, yes, I definitely hope to. But it was weird. I kind of had this mindset through the year that it's like, oh, it's only a school project. Don't stress too much. So I hope that in the future, I won't be debilitated by my self-doubt being like, oh, it's the real world, it needs to be good music. Every idea I had needs to be perfect. But yes, I think I will continue this in the future. Yes, Father.
Oh, Dad question.
Uh-oh.
Well done, Bear. Two questions. You use a lot of software for these processes of building these songs. When you upgrade or change to different software, how does that sort of impact on your creative process? And the other one was sort of when you have these songs, what's your mindset or level of self-doubt when you were saying, okay, this is finished, this is done, ready to move on?
Yeah. In answer to the first question, wow. There was a lot of self-doubt starting on this software because I haven't transitioned. I don't know what that feeling's like. I haven't had it in around 2.5 years. So when I would try and create something, I would have this idea in my head, and what would stop me was the software. So that's very down, and you don't feel like making music after that. But in answer to the second question, which was, sorry. Oh, how do I know when I'm done? That's also a very tricky question. You're never done. You just have to be comfortable with how much work you've put in and just call it at a certain point, because nothing is ever going to be perfectly finished.
Thanks, Ned. Listen, I learned so much over there. One thing that I was really inspired, I actually wondered, more a question or a statement. Have you thought about becoming a motivational speaker? Because that was great.
Not at all. This is like, this is a bit like, I convinced myself that I was more nervous for my performance in the middle of the year, but just before coming up, I was like, there was ringing in my ears and I just couldn't think. So, absolutely not, sorry.
Another online question. Yeah. Have you ever thought about trying out different genres, instruments, or implementing purposeful practice in other areas of your life?
Wow, okay. Sorry, what was the first bit of that question? Oh, yeah. So, actually, at the beginning of my production, that was when I was most experimenting with multiple genres. I'd just attempt to make something in a certain genre, but now it's more melding other genres into like dance music, I think. So it's technically other genres, but it's still under the one subheading of dance music, which I think will be my main one for a while. But we'll see. What was the rest? Yes. So I play the piano. I definitely used to struggle with not practicing purposely with that. And as well as this speech, it was it was every day, and it really paid off because I don't think I would be looking up as much if I didn't practice.
I've actually got a bit of a cheeky one, Ned. I'd like to indulge for a minute as a teacher and say one of the great joys we have is seeing growth over time. So well done you. You're actually much stronger at this than you've given yourself credit for. But I'd also just like to acknowledge we've got several other people here in the audience tonight who've also done music or sound. And we've heard from Casey, but I wanted to be cheeky and ask Lucinda and Cooper if they've got a comment for you.
What? What are you... You've done 14 songs?
Yeah.
And the performance that Ned did in the year was amazing and just absolutely smashed it. Yeah, very proud. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. We do have another live stream question just to rescue Lucinda and Cooper. Ned, can one overcome perfectionism, especially when it comes to being creative? You might want to wait for another talk for that one audience member.
I was just about to say that.
We do have one coming.
Saturday? Tomorrow. Be here tomorrow to find out that answer. Listening to the other thank yous, I just realised I forgot Eleanor and Elise, so I'm going to wing this one. Elise, the guardianship this year, you're practically one of us now. I just want to thank you for being so friendly and supportive in everything we do. Eleanor, project coordinator. Far out. Yeah, the amount of work you put into this event it's a real honour to be a part of it. Secondly, I'd like to thank my parents. Dad, the hours of calls where I couldn't figure out the endless amount of tech issues I had, as well as always giving me honest feedback on my music, even when it seemed like I didn't want any. Thank you for keeping me motivated through the year. It has been so worth it. Mum, thank you for letting me eat in my room so I could make music and watch Netflix instead of being at the dinner table. Thank you for waking me up in the morning with the same enthusiasm every time. And thank you for feeding, loving, and caring for me. To my sister, thank you for inspiring me with your musical talents. Watching your show gave me the confidence to do my own. And thank you for singing my song. Very much appreciated. Thank you to my supervisor, Ruth, for being the check-in and confidence boosters throughout the year that kept me pushing through. You kept me believing in myself and reassuring that this project was fully my own. My wonderful class, the fun, the balance, the key for this year to be any fun. I appreciate and cherish every single one of you. Thank you. And a quick thank you to Ashley for doing the catering at my event as well. Finally, my mentor, who unfortunately cannot be here today. I could give a whole other 25-minute speech as to how amazing this man is. And I really wish I could with the amount of time and effort he has put into this project this year. The phone calls, I got excited every Thursday this year to hear your comforting voice of yours. that made me feel like I could achieve anything. You made me surprise myself with how much I could accomplish, and I think without you, I wouldn't have done anything near to what I've done this year. The knowledge I've gained from you is probably worth about 3 different TAFE courses, and I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this. Thank you. And thank you for taking time out of your days to come and see these amazing speeches. I strongly encourage you to come over the next few days for some amazing content. Thank you.
Thank you for coming and joining us this evening. Didn't they do a wonderful job? You really did. I'm struck by how far we've travelled with our speakers just tonight. We started in the sky. We explored hillside trails. We considered opportunities for creation. We've been able to imagine mindful sowing of beautiful things, as well as making great music, and all infused with a love of learning. Thank you. And thank you to all of the people behind the scenes who've helped us to get here today. There are many more who haven't been mentioned by name. We'll make sure we do that later. But thank you, all of you. And again, please join us for our next evening tomorrow night at 5, where we're hearing about perfectionism, among other things. So thank you to the live stream for joining us. Good evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.